First of all, I want to be very clear that when he was a reporter, he was not doing ad sales. And when he was doing ad sales, he was not a reporter. Steve would be furious if I didn't make that very clear. And Eric was talking about how we used to know these people from other things. I used to know Kevin from National Review, and I used to know this guy from Congress. So I want to say...
What's that a laugh line?
Sorry. So, and I want to thank again Acton Institute. They're real happy warriors in a good fight, and we're very grateful for them. Wonderful hosts. America's Future used to be America's Future Foundation. It's very difficult for me not to say the foundation part, but apparently the kids don't like the word foundation anymore, which is strange since they like based, right? So like. And also another sponsor, I want to make sure I get it right, is the Bonson Group, which is run by my friend Dave Bonson. It's weird that like the Bonson Group would be named after Dave Bonson. And of course, Truscott Rossman. I don't know exactly what they do, but
PR.
But I'm generally drunk most of the time anyway, so I wouldn't hold it against them. And I want to thank most of all of you. I'm always sort of amazed at how far some people come for these things. It's very humbling and kind of stalkery, but in a good way. And so again, I'm really grateful. Thank you all for coming here. I guess we should start with some rank. First of all, like, can we get a round of applause? What do we think of the hair?
I really appreciate that because at this point I'm in too deep. I don't know how to get out of it.
Yeah.
So I'm glad it's going over well.
Every time I see him on CNN now, I think of like an old episode of NYPD Blue where a homeless guy witnessed a murder, and they got to get him cleaned up and put in a suit. Kevin.
This is how they depict Jesus in Michigan churches.
Kevin came up to me and whispered when he saw Peter come in, between the three of us, we have average length hair. So anyway, I'm grateful you left your refrigerator box in your shopping cart to come here. We're not going to, first of all, I guess we should start paying some respects to Dick Cheney. We found out he passed away today. We don't need to dwell on it, but I thought we should address it. Do you have any thoughts about?
A titan, for sure. His interpretation of the executive branch powers do not align necessarily with my interpretation of the executive branch powers. But Dick Cheney also means strong West Michigan connection. Served on the board of the Gerald R. Ford Foundation, was chief of staff to President Ford, and just that cabinet, insane. As a kid going to Ford Foundation meetings, it was like, oh, there's Alan Greenspan, there's the Secretary of Treasury, there's the Secretary of Defense. This is during George W. Bush's term. There's the Vice President. Okay. I mean, just somebody who made just an incredible mark. Titan.
Yeah. So Kevin, it's funny. I was. It'll be out on tomorrow's episode of The Remnant. I talked to Yuval Levin today a little bit about this. We spent most of the conversation talking about his passion for Canadian porn, but we did also got into this. And it's funny, in the 1970s and 80s, there was a big fight between Newt Gingrich and Dick Cheney over presidential power versus Congress. And I don't say this very often, but Newt was right. And Dick Cheney was wrong. And it's kind of funny that in some ways, this is not a criticism of Dick Cheney, because when push came to shove, he put it all on the line and he voted for Kamala Harris, which you almost would think he would burst into flames doing, but he did it anyway because he thought it was the right thing to do. But his arguments about the Panama intervention, and we're going to talk a little bit about that kind of stuff in a minute, but about, he was deeply involved in the use of executive power and military power to oust a dictator in South America. Those are the arguments, to the extent the administration is trying to find real precedents for what they're doing. They're relying on a lot of that. And he was like arguably the foremost sort of policy intellectual politician about unitary executive and executive power. And it's kind of like he made a wish on a monkey paw. So what do you think about all that?
I think a lot of Cheney's thinking at that time probably had to do with the fact that until 1994, no one had seen a Republican Congress since like the New Deal, essentially, or before. And so I think that he was raised in an environment where he thought it was always going to be basically Tip O'Neill and that kind of, labor union hack time server sort of way of doing Congress. Yeah, tragically, he won that debate and won it in a big way. One of my favorite things about Cheney was that, it's this great priceless $35,000 handmade Italian shotgun that he shoots a guy in the face with. That's a life well lived in my book. I'd have checked out right there, and I'd have been like, "This is the you're going out on top." But
didn't hurt his approval ratings, by the way. I think still better than Harris.
Not in Texas, anyway. Certainly. I think that I kind of wish he were here to have the conversation with us in some ways to see if he's changed his mind about it.
Yeah.
I know that the Trump era certainly had Cheney rethinking. As we all did, some of our assumptions about what the Republican Party actually is all about and what the conservative movement's actually all about, what people really care about, what their real principles and values are, how much we care about ethics and good citizenship and patriotism and things like that. So I think he was a brilliant guy in a lot of ways, but he lived politics day to day. I think the way people who operate at that level kind of have to. Mm-hmm. He's not writing op-eds. He's running meetings in the White House, and that just ends up, I think, giving you a different kind of mentality that's hard to judge from the outside.
All right. I have actually a lot more thoughts about Dick Cheney, but we should probably move on because I'll have plenty of opportunities to give air to them. We had elections today. Again, we don't have to do a lot of rank punditry in part because this thing is going to air after everybody knows exactly what happened. But it sounds I was dropping some Benjamins on my shoeshine guys who were giving me some intel, and it sounds like Mandami is going to win. I have no idea what the situation in New Jersey and Virginia is, other than the expectation was the Democrats would win, and all the question is by how much. So, how do you think about those elections? Part of my problem is people who talk about politics for a living, they got to talk about something, and so they tend to invest these off-year elections with a lot more importance than I think than they necessarily deserve.
Well, and specifically investing in what does this tell us about 2028? What does this tell us about the next or the midterm election in 2026, or drawing forward to 2028? I mean, I think Mamdani shows how important the primaries actually are, and also there's a profound. And you don't see this, because you don't necessarily get this with in kind of swingier areas. You don't see this as among members of Congress as much as sort of the kind of big city Democratic just laziness to actually try to deliver. It is entirely a project of funneling taxpayer dollars to constituent interest groups. Bill de Blasio is one of the least remarkable human beings you could ever think of. And
he's very tall.
And he followed Michael Bloomberg, for God's sakes.
He's not very tall.
He's not very tall, no. Yeah. So it helps to have height. Scott Bessent, very tall man.
Yes.
Very tall man. But I think
when Bloomberg stands on his gigantic pile of money,
it levels it out.
It's a very, very large man.
But he needed a literal soapbox, in that case. But Mamdani ran a vapid policy, but when it came to emotionally resonating, connecting with the voters, incredible campaign. Cuomo's done absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
Cuomo was the guy who just felt he deserved it. He had been governor, so give this to me next. And that sense of entitlement on the political side, it's weird. There isn't, for all the faults on the right, there isn't this sense of entitlement as in some of the more kind of machine politics on the left. And the result is insurgents have I don't know if punter's chance is the right word. I'm using British phrases I don't understand. Is that okay, never mind. They have a fighting chance, and they can win a fantastic upset.
So, Kevin, you've written a lot about the problem Republicans have had taken over big cities. And you used to, it's still Fort Worth that's the largest Republican-run city in America?
Dallas?
The mayor of Dallas, who was elected as a Democrat, switched
Oh,
parties.
that's right. Okay.
So I think that by population, Fort Worth is the biggest city that's elected a Republican mayor recently. Miami often elects Republican mayors as well, sometimes San Diego.
So what is your theory? Because I forget the Tip O'Neill, all politics is local kind of thing. Why? The Democratic Party is a party for urban liberals. Like that's 80% of its voters at this point, 70% of its voters. And they're really bad at running cities. And they keep getting reelected. And I keep wanting to say, what would you say you do here, right? I mean, like, so what is, is there a way to change that other than, well, is there a way to change it that is plausible?
No. So, back before Rudy Giuliani became an actual weirdo, whatever Rudy Giuliani became, I think he's a pretty good example of something that a lot of us have said for a long time, which is if you want to be a successful mayor or a successful person in big city government, you really only have to do a couple of things. You got to keep a lid on crime, these sort of basic, public service issues, make sure the trash gets picked up. In New York, if the subways are running on something like a schedule and crime is under control, more or less, and you don't have every Starbucks in the city converted into a psychiatric ward and homeless shelter, it's a great city. But if those things aren't working, if the trains aren't working, if crime makes the streets feel dangerous, well, you're not moving there for the schools. You're not moving there for other sorts of stuff, and then it just kind of falls apart. So, I lived in Dallas for a long time, and people think of Texas as being, very conservative and low tax and all that stuff, which is not, of course. Dallas is a very democratic city, very badly governed city with terrible public schools, really high taxes, bad public services. It's basically Philadelphia except really hot, and but you only have to fix a couple of those things. And just a little bit of progress goes a long way. I know here in Michigan that the mayor of Detroit is someone who people are looking at as a potential independent gubernatorial candidate and who's won some real respect for himself. Actually, I had a question for Peter here. I was just kind of wondering, if you don't mind my hijacking just for a second. Yeah. You said Newt Gingrich was right is something you don't say very often. So I'm going to say Ezra Klein had a good point about something which is rarely said sentence, but he was talking about the upcoming elections, and he was looking at New York versus Virginia, and the idea of the Democrats being able to run different kinds of candidates in different places to represent different kinds of constituencies without having to impose this kind of stultifying cultural uniformity on their party everywhere, to kind of let Virginia be Virginia, and maybe let Colorado be Colorado, and let New York City be a place for boutique radical weirdos. To do whatever they're going to do there under the delusional belief that finance companies still have to be located in New York, which they don't. Do you think he was right about that? Do you think they're learning how to be sort of a multipolar, heterogeneous party in a way that the Republicans aren't? Because I think what got me on this is the reason Republicans can't win in cities is because the cultural valence of the Republican Party is southern, rural, and evangelical. And that's just not really something that accords very well with urban life. The way it's lived in the United States. Those values and tastes and styles are just at odds with one another in lots of ways. But I think the Democrats maybe have a chance to be different things in different places in a way that used to be more normal for politics. It used to be that a Southern California Republican and a New England Republican, back when those existed, were different animals, and everyone kind of got that, and it wasn't a national crisis because they didn't agree on some issue.
I mean, but now like the correlation over from 2000, the correlation between how a municipality would vote from kind of a state, county, or municipal level and how they voted for federal office, it was like a 0.55, which is, better than 50-50 odds, but it was not determinative necessarily. That p-value in 2020 went up to 0.95, which is why you do not have those ticket splitting. I mean, that at the end of the day, everything is nationalized. Party identification is nationalized. There's no ability to distinguish between here's the candidate and here's the letter next to their name and try to split the difference. I mean, Joe Manchin's really the last one on the Democratic side that was in a predominantly red area, and that's just not going to happen again. Like, when you look at some of these areas, though, I would say, number one, if Ezra Klein if you look at his posts on Twitter and you see the comments, it is folks on the left dragging him through the coals constantly. So you may not like him, but that man is doing the Lord's work in terms of what he actually believes for his party.
It is fun to watch him suffer.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. Yeah. The Schadenfreude has got to be glorious, but at the same time, like Abigail Spanberger, and I have a lot of respect for her. She has her deviations from national party orthodoxy. I mean, that leash is short that all these candidates have. Seth Moulton was facing primary challengers because he said some things about, like, I don't really want my daughters playing against boys, doing flag football and getting tackled. Like, something that would be a 90-10 issue nationally, but got him hounded by some of those groups. So until the influence of the groups starts to change, and that's sort of a code word for the large super PAC, 501c4 foundations on the left oriented around specific issue areas like the environment, LGBTQ issues, abortion, and a handful of others. Until those groups become less demanding and exacting on the candidates, I don't believe it.
So you have a theory that ideologically charged primaries can enforce party discipline in ways that are bad for politics? Is that what you're saying?
This is a groundbreaking accusation you are making, sir. I got to think long and hard about that.
But I do tend to think that, sort of Mexican-American Democratic voters in Bexar County, Texas, they're different from Upper East Side or, Greenwich, Connecticut, college-educated white liberals. And eventually the party, you would think, would reflect that.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was waving to my 2.5-year-old who's in the back there.
It's very cute. What's your name?
His name is Frederick. He has beautiful long hair. He takes after
Get a
his
haircut.
dad.
Come on.
Yeah, I know.
I'm not saying you're wrong, but I want to push back on it a little bit, insofar as in 2015, if you made that argument about the Republican Party, that the pro-lifers and the NRA and the Federalist Society and the Club for Growth, and you went down a long list of sort of conservative, libertarian, Koch brothers, they won't let someone through the system who deviates from Republican orthodoxy. I'm not saying you'd be right, but it wouldn't be an unreasonable argument. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I think Donald Trump has shown, love him or hate him, is that when you win, a lot of people cave. Mm-hmm. A lot of institutions cave. And so, if I had said in 2015 you're going to get a candidate who, over the course of the next decade, is going to make the Republican Party essentially a nominally pro-choice party, less pro-choice than the Democratic Party, but at the 30,000-foot level, his position was essentially, abortion bans up to, 6 weeks or 8 weeks are too draconian, right? And we should leave it up to the states and all that, which I think is an intellectually defensible position. He hasn't quite gone back on guns, but he's raised a lot of taxes in these things called tariffs, and he's in favor of industrial policy. The Babylon Bee had a good headline, which was Trump will continue to nationalize industry to beat back socialism. And the number of people number of institutions have gone along with it has been really remarkable. I agree with you. It's really hard for me to see a Rahm Emanuel or somebody like that get through the primaries. But a lot of those same party constituencies utterly caved for Bill Clinton once he got elected. And it turns out that being president forces everybody to get in line. And so it may be like the amount of change we've had in our politics in the last 10 years has been remarkable. So my only point is that I don't know that it's forever has to be this way about Democratic Party and urban politics, because there are lots of things happening in the last 10 years that we have defied what we thought were going to be forever things too.
Well, and I think that's where, assuming Mamdani wins tonight, which is not a sure thing, but
Inshallah.
I would put money on it, right? That is a story of basically flipping a finger to the establishment and saying, I'm just going to do my own thing.
Yeah.
Now, what he actually had, he is a talented, I don't want to say entertainer. I mean, he's a talented
He's very
figure.
likable. I mean,
Yeah, he's
like
got
for people not caught up in this stuff,
Yeah.
he's an extremely likable, charismatic guy.
He's got a good political sense.
Yeah.
Right. Again, I think his policies are garbage. I think they will fail if tried to implement. But he resonates. He actually resonates. If Graham Plattner succeeds in beating Janet Mills in the primary up in Maine, despite his Nazi tattoos, which he kept even after he was aware that they were Nazi tattoos, and not like, oh, it's a Nazi it's a Nazi tattoo.
Yeah. And this is causing a huge crisis for the Heritage Foundation about who to back. But I'm sorry, go on.
No. Both are examples, though, of in Janet Mills, the incumbent governor, who is 76 and would be the oldest first-term member of the Senate in the Senate's history. That is who the Democratic Senate campaign is backing. That's who Chuck Schumer's super PAC is backing, right? So you have just the older generation just clinging on with dear life, with emaciated fingers, trying to scratch their way to maintain that relevance, and then young folks who are those upstarts. So that is the threat. I mean, Donald Trump was very much that to the GOP. It was, okay, yeah, they believe the system works until you prove that it doesn't, in which case everyone is left adrift and the old regime has fallen. What is going to replace it? I don't know. On the right, now is it Nick Fuentes? What's that going to be? It's not going to be Nick Fuentes. But like the sort of the space opens up for new thinking, which can be awful and anti-Semitic and racist and terrible, or can also shake off all of the calcified, ossified, barnacles that they had just picked up over the decades.
Kevin, anything?
Just one little maybe point of nuance there is that Clinton got away with just absolute murder in lots of ways, both for his bad behavior, but also for defying his party and what they expected. Because in 1992, the Democrats thought they were just never going to win another presidential election. They thought they were just shut out. And right now, their party's up in revolt because they really thought that Donald Trump couldn't beat him twice. And it's not that they're in a state of desperation because they thought they were never going to win. They're in a state of outrage because they thought they were sure to win. And how did we screw this one up again and get beat by this game show host a second time after he once tried to overthrow the government of the United States? I find this mysterious, but I also think it's weird that evangelical America's great champion has been in 3 porn films.
I can only count 2.
American or Canadian? Because there was the Yuval comment. I wanted to follow up on that.
It's like The Godfather. People don't count the second one, really.
Godfather 2 is a great movie. It's Godfather 3 we don't talk about. All right. So I probably should have asked this beforehand. Peter, what are you doing with yourself these days? I mean, like, I talked to you before this. I texted you. Listeners of my podcast know I try not to become friends with politicians. And my standard line about it is it's like if you're a research scientist with lab animals, it's much easier to stick a needle in test subject 47B than Mr. Whiskers. But somehow Meijer made it through the gauntlet. But I texted you saying, hey, what do you want to talk about? And you had this thing about national security, foreign policy intersection for critical energy stuff and rare earth minerals in South America and how it aligns with our foreign policy.
That's what everyone wants to hear about, right? You came here for that?
I was like, oh, man, he's such a all he wants to do is pander to the lowest common denominator.
Mr. Whiskers is harshing my vibe.
All right, so Mr. Whiskers, like, you're doing some national security stuff these days. I understand it. You can't really talk about it or something, or you'll have to kill me or whatever. But like, what's going on in South America, and what do you think about it?
No, so to answer your question, so
Yeah.
I'm involved in, I'm a co-founder of an investment company called the New Industrial Corporation, part of the broader reindustrialized movement. In a nutshell, for capital-intensive emerging companies, we help them and we help finance and then develop their built facility, because so much of our investment ecosystem is built off the Silicon Valley model, great for high OpEx, low CapEx companies, software, tech. When you start to actually try to build things, that's where the model doesn't really work. And I know we also talked about like Basel III and some of the liquidity ratio issues,
Yeah,
post
for
global
sure.
financial crisis.
Yeah.
So that's really the space we're occupying, is where regional and middle
Excellent.
market banking has fallen short. So happy to elaborate.
Save me some material, dude.
No, but in a nutshell, I mean, that's talking with companies who want to do actual, real, physical, tangible things, and some of that is, it's reshoring things that went abroad in the 80s and 90s, and now China's competitive labor advantage has really shrunk, especially when you consider the degree of automation and roboticization that's getting into traditional manufacturing before you get into advanced manufacturing, and really a lot of this is looking at, China's winning in a lot of areas economically because they have a very diversified economic base. And you can bring back one industry, you can bring back, one company, but you really need to have that entire community to be able to make that sustaining. And that's where, the challenge on, quote unquote industrial policy, or on kind of government subsidy is it's really easy to do that with a big company. The challenge is you need to have that flow down to the small and medium enterprises to make it sustaining and to make it permanent, which is something that Michigan needs to learn from Ohio. Ohio's doing a great job. You want to believe that I'm not a politician anymore? I'm in Michigan saying that Ohio is
I was
doing a
gonna say,
fantastic
jeepers.
job, and we should be ashamed. We should all be ashamed.
That's for a New Yorker. That's like hearing the People's Front of Judea talking about what a great game the Judean People's Front has. All right, so let me dumb it down for my own benefit. What do you think about the actual policies coming from the Trump administration vis-a-vis tariffs and industrial policy, the golden share stuff of various companies? This is the kind of stuff that would have been unimaginable as like for non-national security kind of stuff. It would be unimaginable for conservatives 10 years ago, and now it's like, why do you hate America if you have a problem with it?
So this is where the headline is really challenging, right? Think of the, Scott Bessent, Treasury Secretary, gives a $40 billion bailout to Argentina. Wow, he cut a $40 billion check and just handed it to him? That's crazy, while soybean farmers are struggling and yada, yada, yada. It's like, no, there was a $20 billion currency swap option. There was a $20 billion loan facility. Thanks to the elections in Argentina, where Milei's party wildly exceeded expectations, the U.S. is going to make probably several $100 million off of that, going right back into the Treasury, right? But when it comes to the actual headline writers, they just say bailout. Because when you actually explain some of these exchange fund dynamics, it gets into the new, everyone's eyes glaze over, right? So I am incredibly frustrated by the headlines, because as somebody who does this professionally, I want to actually explain what this policy was. And usually that means having to click through several links and read the actual release that's coming out, and then maybe figure out who has a Bloomberg terminal who can get the right access to the analysis. So when it comes to the Intel component, right? The U.S. Steel, Golden Shares, Cleveland Cliffs, that's a whole different dynamic, dealing with labor unions and all this. Where the CHIPS Act comes in, which was I don't want to say uncontroversial. I mean, I'm sure Heritage scored against it, and Reason Magazine didn't like it. And I love Reason Magazine, just to be very clear. It was industrial policy around semiconductors. Every other country massively subsidizes their semiconductor production. If we're the only ones not doing it, then we are going to be at a massive strategic disadvantage. And if China takes Taiwan, and you have the first or second largest economy taking over the 12th economy, and 90% of global semiconductor manufacturing, that is very bad for U.S. interests. So I supported the CHIPS Act. I co-sponsored the CHIPS Act. What Trump did with the Intel deal was basically do a debt to equity, where the debt was really forgivable swap. So instead of it being essentially
Turning off your mic.
Yeah, I know, yeah. Oh, who did I piss off there? Instead of it being essentially an open-ended check to that company, which, by the way, wasn't open-ended because the Commerce Department under President Biden threw in a ton of strings attached around project labor agreements, around making sure there was childcare there, yada, 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 the everything bagel liberalism. Instead of treating it like that check with strings attached, it was, hey, why don't the American taxpayers have some upside here? Now, there's the challenge that comes in, which is where if that governance option is exercised, there are ways in which that could go very wrong. Mm-hmm. But the kvetching and the pearl clutching as if this was like, oh my God, we've never done this before. It's like, you didn't care at all when this was happening, when it was literally taxpayer dollars going out the door with no prospect of them returning in any fashion. And now that the American taxpayer might see a return on that investment, suddenly it's a problem.
Okay, so I cared about it back then. I think Kevin, who's an Eisenhowerian anarcho-capitalist, cared about it. Kevin, do you have any thoughts on this?
Well, I was going to say, if you want to write a really detailed defense of the Argentina bailout, I know a guy who has a magazine who might want to publish it. There's also been some developments in economics, Hayek won a Nobel Prize, Milton Friedman won a Nobel Prize for their defense of free market economics. And we tried industrial policy over the years, and it failed, and it failed, and it failed. And then Marco Rubio came along and said, well, we should do it smart. I thought, well,
An important distinction.
No one had ever thought of that before. Why don't we try doing it the right way? So I'm waiting for that Nobel Prize to come. Probably before the Peace Prize comes for Trump, he's going to get that Nobel Prize for economics, where we should do industrial policy the right way, as opposed to the wrong way. I'm actually okay with money going out the door with no prospect of return if it's national security. It's pretty much how national security policy works. you buy bombs, they have no real economic value except for blowing stuff up that you need to blow up every now and then. It's a necessary evil, but it's still an evil. It's a net loss economically speaking. I'm okay with that. But I wonder what you think if we wanted to develop a rare earths industry in the United States. Is it just a matter of reforming environmental laws, or what really needs to happen? Because it's not absence of the physical commodity.
No, it's mostly that. It's the regulatory and the permitting. And I think a good example, and this is my defense of the industrial policy, is look at rare earth magnet manufacturing in the U.S. We had that. GM was doing it in the 80s and the 90s. They had a partnership agreement with a Japanese firm. It was a niobium iron boron magnet that they had the patent on, exclusive rights. We were building that in the U.S. China under Deng Xiaoping in the 80s said this is a national priority that we get into this rare earth mineral space. They have some of the reserves. They obviously do not have the EPA. They do not have NEPA. They do not have any of these things that will stand in the way of developing it. They do not care about poisoning rivers. They do not care about environmental or human lives or damage. And so they went full bore there. In a perfectly free market, what that did is the Chinese were able to flood the market, depress the price of those rare earth magnets to the point that the non-subsidized free market American companies went out of business. Some of the manufacturing went over to Japan. The patent and a lot of the equipment was then sent to China. At which point, now that the Chinese had the stranglehold on that and were able to be a dominant market player, they jacked the prices up and restricted the export of it. So this is the challenge with industrial policy in a vacuum, I think is a bad idea. The challenge is if we are similar to the semiconductors, if we're the only ones not subsidizing, if we're the only ones not making those governmental investments, then the manufacturing is going to go to where it is. And when push comes to shove and, say, the Pacific is closed to international shipping because of a hot war between two great powers, when we are now all of a sudden looking and saying, oh boy, how many of our exquisite defense articles like the F-35 have upwards of a third to a half of their components coming from the place that this thing was kind of designed to drop bombs on, and that's maybe a problem? That's where, to your point, on the national security side of the house, you cannot perfectly segregate what is economic and what is national security. And now to that point, that's where it becomes very dangerous on presidential emergency powers, where if you're getting to the point where you are putting tariffs on, say, finished kitchen cabinets that are getting imported into the U.S. under national security provisions, I'm not sure that passes the smell test. And we'll see what the Supreme Court thinks.
But that's sort of where I was going to go, is like one of my great frustrations with these kind of debates is I'll say Trump's going crazy with the tariff stuff, and then people will, like, why are we putting these massive tariffs on Canada? And they'll say, well, because it's a national security issue, and don't you care about confronting China? And I was like, well, yeah, but Canada's not China. And, like the factoid I use the most is, because it's so, I think, illustrative of the larger problem, is we would have a trade surplus with Canada were it not for the fact we buy so much oil from them. And the reason we buy so much oil from them is in part because they sell it to us at below market rates. And they do that because of the convenience of the market. The pipeline comes right down to the Gulf of, to the Gulf of Mexico. I'm sorry, Gulf of America. Sorry. And like, let me put it this way. Is there any argument to your mind for the kind of industrial policy and protectionism that we're hearing that isn't a national security argument? Like, do the economics work outside of? Do they make any sense at all outside of the realm of national security? Because I'm totally sympathetic to the idea of tariffing the crap out of China if we can get away with it. The problem is China's learned a big lesson in the last 6 years about how to tariff-proof itself. Throwing tariffs on our allies, like our foreign policy used to be that we were going to isolate China by sort of knitting together an alliance, and now we are pushing a lot of members of that alliance into deals with China because we're tariffing the crap out of them. And it can't all be a national security argument, even if the president is invoking national security powers to justify it.
Can I interrupt with one quick thought while Peter thinks through this? Mm-hmm. Tariffs are a really dumb tool for national security. We don't have a tariff with Cuba. We just prohibit trade with them. If you think that trade with China is an existential national security problem, you prohibit trade with China. You don't try to solve it with a sales tax.
On Americans. Yeah.
On Americans.
Okay, so the Canadian example I love, because Trump threatened a bunch of tariffs on Canada. Mm-hmm. And the Canadians then implemented reciprocal tariffs on the anticipated American tariffs. The anticipated American tariffs at this point didn't come, but the Canadians still put the reciprocal tariffs on us. And most of my company is actually Canadians. Someone said, oh, I knew you were serious about infrastructure project development because you hired Canadians. Right? When we can be that to Michigan versus Ohio on the project development side, that's when we're winning, okay? That should be an applause line. But thank you. Rise to the challenge. There's a lot of elements of the Trump administration's policy that when I look at, if you start from the broad brush of Trump doesn't want new wars. And now let's set aside Venezuela, because that is a whole different dynamic, and or the bombing of the Iranian nuclear facilities.
And Nigeria.
And a handful of other places. But when it comes to...
And the enemy within, but yes. That's okay.
But distilling that down to preventing great power conflict is the overarching goal. If we take that as the thesis, right, and you could even go back to Bridge Colby and talk about the rebalancing to the Pacific from this element, and how does America's support for Ukraine kind of tie in there? Like, there is at least a through line there. The challenge then becomes, how do you square tariffs on India, on Vietnam, on the folks who are allied with us against China that we're now kind of throwing a little bit into the mix. And
Penguin Island, but go on.
Yeah. No, and I, like, again, if I'm making the best faith argument on why the Trump administration is doing that, a lot of it comes back to the fact that attention spans are short, and you can leverage this threat, you can pull it back, and as long as there's a nice photo op with that leader, and all of a sudden there's gushing praise coming from the U.S. side, all will be forgiven. Which you could say cynically, realistically, it actually kind of works in some places. Like, Trump looks at all of this on the same playing field, and this is where I think there's going to be a rude awakening with the Supreme Court's determination on whether or not the IEPA actually gives him the authority to implement a lot of these tariffs. But right now, I mean, it is, foreign direct investment in the U.S., that sort of leveraging the threat of tariffs to the point where all of a sudden 10% tariffs are viewed as like a phew, we really dodged that bullet. Like 5 years ago, that would have been crazy. Mm-hmm. I
still think it's crazy, but okay. Yeah.
I have a longer digression about a Hezbollah member explaining to me Trump's negotiating policy vis-a-vis his own view towards Israel, which is find us at the bar afterwards, and I will relay that one. But the idea then of kind of moving the Overton window, or what's within the realm of acceptability, that, I don't know. Similar to the Iran nuclear strike, hey, it'd be great if we could get rid of Iran's nuclear capability. The question is, what happens when we do that? And honestly, the answer was basically nothing. In which case, 2 thumbs up, fantastic. Tariffs, what is the economic consequence going to be? I think it's fair to say it hasn't been as dramatic as maybe some of the folks who feared it would be. That doesn't mean that there haven't been real world effects for many businesses, but in a lot of these, I don't know. I feel like I've been proven wrong enough times that I'm like, all right, my gut says this is not the right way to go. It's gonna happen. Let's see.
Okay, so I don't normally do this, but the question I asked was, is there an argument for what he's doing with trade outside of national security arguments? I'm not sure. I'm not sure I heard an answer.
No, okay. I will say on that, I'm usually a big fan that having predictability and governance and having that element of stability is really important, because volatility oftentimes has a cost and really no benefit. When it comes to exports, when it comes to imports, that's actually where the threat and the potential for the tariff to add in, to have a little bit of a risk factor premium for things coming from abroad versus building that in the U.S. Mm-hmm. That is something where, the automotive industry found that in spades with semiconductor manufacturing, where you had a $40,000 vehicle that was sitting, could not be sold because a $10 chip that went into the seat warmer, was stuck in the port of Shanghai that was closed for 3 weeks during COVID. Right. Being able to better balance that is how you start to tip the scales without, and it's one level of heavy-handed intervention, but it's without having to massively subsidize the domestic industry. If you can have those companies say, you know what, yeah, this thing costs a little bit more, but we will pay for the ability to insure against that type of volatility. To me, that's the best faith argument.
Okay.
You seem unconvinced.
Yeah,
you seem very unconvinced.
I'm wildly unconvinced. I just keep thinking about, so the province of Ontario runs an ad quoting Ronald Reagan accurately, and Trump says invokes emergency powers to increase the tariffs 10%. Mm-hmm. And the idea that an ad running during a baseball game is, first of all, a national security emergency, I find laughably idiotic, and I find that I would have a lot more faith in your interpretation, never mind in Trump himself, if I heard him once betray some ability to make a coherent argument for what he is doing. And he is incapable of explaining how tariffs aren't a tax on Americans. Literally he can't do it, and he gets angry, and he says that's outrageous, but he can't explain how, foreign direct investment is the flip side of a trade deficit, because, the example I always use, is Scott Lincecum, who kind of explained it to me. It's like, if you take your kids to Chuck E. Cheese and you win a whole bunch of Chuck E. Cheese tokens, the only place you can spend them is at Chuck E. Cheese. And so if you send dollars away for a trade deficit, buying things from abroad, and then those dollars go away, they have to come back. And so for the most part, with a rounding error, the trade deficit and the foreign direct investment are the same number. And like, I'm really stupid about this stuff. And I can understand that. I have never part of the job of being president of the United States, when you're screwing with millions of people's livelihoods and screwing millions and hundreds of millions of consumers, is to be able to coherently explain the policy, and he can't do that. And when I hear, no offense,
Please.
a certain amount of turd polishing about his policies.
Can I phrase it as the madman theory of global trade?
Sure, you can phrase it that way.
Why does he have to? Why does
can't
he
stop
have
you.
to be mad when it's a much simpler explanation that he's dumb?
No, because I think
That he's
in a lot of
he's an
these-
80-year-old American born in New York City who speaks English like a Ukrainian who learned it when he was 45.
which helps break through to the American people. Sadly, no. But the reality with a lot of the policies, though, like the fact that the counterparts are like, we have no idea what the hell this guy is going to come up with next. And if you run an ad criticizing him, he's going to slap 10% tariffs. Again, I do not think the president should have that power. I was the co-sponsor in the House minority introductor of the National Security Reforms and Accountability Act, which would have explicitly stripped that power from the president. The Biden administration was signed onto it until the environmental lobby said, whoa, 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 whoa. If he passes this bill, then we cannot use emergency powers to implement the Green New Deal by declaring a climate emergency. So I'm in a little bit of a place where I'm like, you know what? There's reasonable criticism. I think you guys are fair-minded judges. But for the Democrats who are anti-tariff, who hated tariffs that Trump put in, had no problem with Biden keeping those tariffs on, and now only take an issue with the tariffs because it's Trump that's doing it, I do not brook that criticism.
No, that's fine.
You know,
Look, I am here for any criticism of Democrats being hypocritical. My biggest problem is most of the time, particularly when I'm on CNN sets, when I hear Republicans talk about how hypocritical Democrats are, the charge of hypocrisy is also hypocritical, because when Democrats were doing it, Republicans were saying X. Now that Republicans are doing it, Republicans are saying Y. It's like they've switched from shirts to
100%.
skins
Filibuster.
on things. Right. Well, I'll give the best example. I don't want to get too close to home for you, but like Democrats saying that the January 6th crowd and the Trumpers and all those guys are fascists and Nazis and they're authoritarians and they're going to destroy our country. But let's throw tens of millions of dollars behind them in primary challenges to people like Pete Meijer, so that they'll have easier candidates to beat in a general election. There is just the amount of cynicism and hypocrisy on this. But like the debates about the filibuster right now, like you have people say when they're in power, we've got to get rid of the filibuster so we can get everything we want. And the second they get out of power, they're like, the filibuster is the bastion of democracy. And then vice versa. And I can just put my hand over the R or D after their name and just guess. I could figure out whose side would benefit from getting rid of the filibuster, because there's zero principle to any of it. And that's the thing that kind of drives me crazy. And so, look, I get what you're saying about some of this stuff. And I am very sympathetic to the national security arguments for specifically about semiconductors from Taiwan and all of that kind of stuff. I am utterly unpersuaded that Donald Trump he says America is like a department store and he gets to set the prices for everything. If Joe Biden had said something like that, Marco Rubio and all those guys would have gone Vietnamese monk, upending jerry cans of gasoline on their heads and setting themselves on fire about it. And yet now they're, that's brilliant. And it's just it's garbage whether you have a D or an R after your name. But we will.
It would be great if we made him do literal shirts and skins, by the way. Wouldn't that be hilarious? The minority party has to be
I've
skins.
already seen Graham Platner's chest many more times than I like, and it all against my wishes.
I screwed up. David Bonson is actually a dear friend of mine and frequent guest on the Remnant. He's also the head of the Bonson Group, and they are sponsors of tonight. And I'm supposed to read an ad, and I will do it without apology. And I apologize; it's a little longer than I would prefer. And I'll take that up with David later. But I'm just going to beg your indulgence for a second. And it will not end with me saying, and that's why I use ExpressVPN. So So now we'll take a quick break for a word from our presenting sponsor, the Bahnsen Group. If you prefer to have your financial affairs managed by a company that has a point of view, that has convictions, and that is not governed by fads and manias of the day, the Bahnsen Group may be worth a look. If you prefer to have your investments managed by a company that eats what they cook, that is a legal and moral fiduciary, that believes public policy and geopolitics matter, and that is aligned with your worldview, the Bahnsen Group may be worth a look. Managing over $8.3 billion, the Bahnsen Group is among the top private wealth management firms in the country, with 90 people and 10 offices around the country, including one that just opened here in Grand Rapids last year. Or this year, I should say. More than just an investment firm, the Bahnsen Group offers a best-in-breed tax department, financial planning, estate planning, institutional advisory services, and a robust family office offering. Take a look at the Bahnsen Group by checking out www.dividendcafe.com, where you can find the market commentary and ongoing perspective of company founder and chief investment officer, David Bahnsen. If you like what you see, the company is happy to have a conversation with you. But for now, just check out www.dividendcafe.com to learn more about the Bahnsen Group, where worldview matters, where alignment with clients is paramount, and where a fundamentally different approach to wealth management can be found. We thank the Bahnsen Group for this terse, economical ad. But no, they're very generous, and David's a dear friend, and we're glad to do it. We thank them for sponsoring tonight's event.
And if you consume a lot of Canadian porn, get ExpressVPN.
So that's it. There was this movie, I think it was called Crazy People. It was with Dudley Moore and Daryl Hannah. And it was about an ad firm where Dudley Moore has like a nervous breakdown and he decides he's just going to tell the truth about products.
Volvo. They're boxy, but they're good.
Yeah, and like...
that was one of the ads.
Metamucil, it'll help you poop, right? I mean, it's like... And... there was a great scene in the movie. It's probably a little blue, but it's okay. Where the rival advertising firm was trying to sort of figure out how are they beating us at all this stuff with all this truth in advertising stuff, where they just tell the truth. Like the AT&T, the phone company ad was, "We're the phone company. We'll do what we want. Get over it," right? And so, like the rival ad firm was like, "How do we this truth thing? What do we do? Like, how does this work?" And at one point, the boss of the evil boss of the rival company yells at one of his employees and says, they have these bottles of shampoo in the middle of the table, and they're trying to figure out truthful things to say. And he yells at one of these guys, and he says, "Smith, tell me something truthful." And there's this long pause, and the guy goes, "I like young boys." And he's like, "About the product." And I often think like you can do much better with some of the guys who advertise on these podcasts if you just like have an honest thing. It's like, don't want your office to find out you're surfing for porn? Try ExpressVPN. You know, I mean, like,
does your family literally have more money than you know what to do with? Call the Bahnsen Group.
Easy. The business guys are going to be very cross with me. This may be exclusive content because this part may never air. So,
can I try
but that's
to
what they do.
this?
People who don't know how to handle their own money, they handle it for them.
That's fair.
I did not know who the Bahnsen Group was.
Uh-huh.
I knew that they sponsored the Remnant, and then I saw their sign in Grand Rapids.
Well, there you go.
There we go.
Yeah.
All right. No porn references involved in that.
I got off the plane in the Grand Rapids airport, and the first sign I saw was for Meijer supermarkets, which was pretty cool. No porn jokes involved. Just a perfectly great story. All right. So I was going to originally introduce you as Peter Kroger, but
all right, get back to the Ohio game. Okay.
Yeah. Pete Safeway. Let's do more rank punditry because you're not going to convince me on this trade thing. And so there is a theory out there that J.D. Vance is the indisputable heir apparent to Donald Trump, and that he is a odds-on favorite to be the next president of the United States. I hear this quite often from a lot of people I like and respect, and just think they've been smoking a lot of pot. And but regardless of what you think about that, where do you think? I mean, we've made jokes about it, about the heritage stuff and all this kind of thing. But a lot of the stuff that we're watching with the fight over Tucker and all that is really, in my mind, and not just Tucker, like the Jeffrey Epstein fights, and all that. This is all about positioning for a post-Trump world. And people are trying to get position and advantage and all that. What do you think, when we were raising money for the Dispatch, we would go to investors and say, look, we don't see ourselves as an anti-Trump outlet. We want to be a post-Trump outlet. And we just didn't realize it would take so long to get to the post-Trump part. But it's coming, either for actuarial reasons or constitutional reasons. So what do you think the post-Trump era for the GOP looks like? Will there be a regression back to some form of Reaganism? Is it just, give me more of that cowbell of populism for as far as the eye can see? What do you think it's going to look like?
The weird thing about, by the way, I think I coined the phrase actuarial arbitrage for that same strategy. The weird, Trump, not to compare him to Saddam Hussein, but he suppresses a lot of
similar taste in toilets.
Similar children.
Well, but he's effectively, and this is actually weirdly enough a complimentary comparison, suppressing a lot of underlying dynamics that when they erupt will be very violent, not literally violent, but but challenging. And I think you're seeing the initial tremors of that with the Heritage Foundation. Trump is. You mentioned a lot of the ways in which, on policy, he is in some ways either a 1980s Democrat or just would have been run out of town on a rail, had he not been a sort of sui generis, charismatic entity.
Yeah.
Right. When he is gone, what does that look like? How do all those struggles, whether it's on the pro-life side, whether it's on sort of the weird kind of groipery side, the positioning that's happening right now is very real. And it's not, none of these fights are about what these fights are actually about. It's about who is sort of viewed as caving into mainstream sensibility first. There's trends of nihilism. I think all the anti-Semitism is just a reaction to nihilism. And you got guys who are citing Baudrillard and Durkheim and all these obscure, not as obscure if you're an anthropology major like I am, but relatively obscure in the public conception, like French philosophers. And it's incredibly tedious, and if you try to follow these arguments, you will get lost, and it's a tremendous waste of your time. But it is all these micro little positioning to figuring out what the poll position will be like. The thing that I am still trying to wrap my head around, and I would love to hear your thoughts on, is Marco Rubio seems to have become the indispensable person within the Trump administration, and I would not have, no shame on him, I would not have thought that in a million years. I thought he would have been one of the first people out the door with his background, and yet he seems to be at the center of everything. And when was the last time you saw him interviewed?
Yeah, well, he's going to be the Governor General of Venezuela. So, Kevin, say what you will about groiperism. At least it's an ethos.
The Sobchak reference was in that.
What do you think this is going to look like? And as Rubio, there's an argument you made that one of the things I like about your Saddam Hussein analogy is I actually think there's the parallel to Shia quietism is there are a lot of Reaganites and nostalgic Reaganites who cannot stick up their head because Trump will cut it off. As Saddam would say, no head, no problem. But once Trump is gone, I do not believe for a moment that J.D. Vance can win that entire coalition, right? The coalition is going to fracture. The Trump coalition is not the same thing as the MAGA coalition. It was not the same thing as the Republican coalition. These are different coalitions, and they rally around Trump for specific reasons. But I think there are going to be a bunch of sort of Reaganites quasi-Reaganites, Reagan nostalgists, conservative nostalgists, who, once it's an open argument again, are going to want to rise up and have the argument. And I'm kind of counting on it, but I could be wrong. What do you think?
I think it's very, very likely that J.D. Vance will be the next president of the Heritage Foundation. They're going to be looking for a new guy sometime. Did he just fire his chief of staff?
We can't quite get clarity on this. They did demote the chief of staff, and then there was word that maybe he quit the Heritage Foundation, but we're not sure. Sadly, his last name is Newhouse, which, given that we're at the Acton Institute, we should clarify no relation to Richard John Newhouse. But anyway.
That is such a straight-up Hondo move, though, right? You screw up and fire your chief assistant.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Because the czar can only be failed. He can never fail. I don't know what the Republican Party is going to look like. I think it's almost certainly going to be something I couldn't support. At this point in time, if I were just looking at my own political trajectory, it's impossible for me to imagine supporting a Republican for any responsible position for anything anywhere. I think the party is just profoundly morally corrupt. I think it is profoundly anti-American, untrustworthy, dishonorable. That about says that, I guess. That's enough adjectives, probably. As you've pointed out in coining the term parliament of pundits, there are conflicting incentive structures in politics right now. There are people who want to have media careers, people who want to be social media influencers, people who want Fox News contracts, and they use electoral politics to get to that stuff.
Irrespective.
Irrespective, thank you. Good Lord. I'm drinking Diet Coke here, and Jonah's drinking whiskey, and he's got the words, and I don't. But I'm irrespective of the electoral outcomes of that. These people don't really want to be in Congress and be on subcommittees that don't actually do anything and don't have any power anymore because Congress has neutered itself. Being children of the 90s, a lot of us anyway, we remember when Newt Gingrich said, dishonestly, as it turned out, that he didn't want to be president, he wanted to be Speaker of the House. He'd always kind of grown up that way. He sort of got over that and decided he wanted to be president later, but that's a different thing. But it's impossible to imagine anyone in that position now. And do you really want to be the chairman of the House Appropriations Committee? I mean, it used to be a real big deal. That would be a person to conjure with. That would be a huge position in Washington. Now it's just like you're the guy who pretends to do stuff while they pass these continuing resolutions and pretend that they have a budget and all the rest of it. So you're going to see a lot of people making decisions that aren't based on attaining actual political power, I think, that are more based on vibes and engagement and social media and that kind of stuff. So I think one of the interesting strictly speaking, political things about the Trump phenomenon is what a brilliant demonstration it was of how real celebrity is such a much, much more powerful force in American life than politics or ideology or political loyalty or anything like that. And we were in this sort of Warholian moment where really everyone does get to be famous for 15 minutes online. And so you're seeing within both of the political parties, more the Republican Party right now because it's more up for grabs than the Democratic Party is. And it also has less gatekeeping or fewer gatekeeping, and I know you're less and fewer. You're gonna come at me on that one. Fewer gatekeeping institutions like unions and things like that can kind of keep people on brand and on message. You're going to end up with this weird contest between people who essentially want to be celebrities and the people who still want to exercise political power. And there are people in Trump's world who really do care profoundly about political power. Some of them are just dangerous malefactors, like Steve Bannon and Steve Miller and people like that. But there are a lot of people who are just looking to be famous and get paid, and that's a huge part of that movement. And Trump is a weird talent in that he's able to do both things at the same time. He was actually able to get himself elected president kind of on a lark and expose the fundamental weakness of our political parties and our political system. So I think it'll really depend on which one of those ends up having the upper hand in the Republican Party for the next 20 years. And I kind of suspect it's going to be the celebrity seeking more than anything else. I don't like to make predictions, but if I were making a prediction, I would guess that the Republican Party is probably in for some time in the wilderness. But even if they're not actually able to get stuff done. Like, Congress isn't getting very much done. They aren't advancing any kind of coherent agenda, really. The Trump agenda is just Trump. And once he's gone, then you're going to have Marco Rubio talking about how sugar subsidies are a national security issue. And I don't think that's going to be super compelling to the world.
I would have said, I literally said almost verbatim 90% of what you said in 2021, and I was wrong. I mean, the challenge of what comes next, I mean, I think it belies the fact that everything is so alienated and sort of disintermediated. I mentioned like Durkheim before, but like the idea of like simulacra, of like a copy of a copy of a copy. I think part of the reason why you have the Fuentes crew is because it isn't nihilism. It is awful and atrocious, but all of a sudden in a world that is lacking meaning, that feels like there's no tangible connection to anything physical or permanent or real, it doesn't really exist. The challenge with kind of Reagan conservatism is it harkens back to principles that are true and good and valid and that have almost in every circumstance been discarded at the first convenient opportunity in pursuit of kind of raw and real power. And that's where Trump is the apotheosis of the actual pursuit of raw and real power, not doing the, hypocrisy is the credit that vice gives to virtue, not even doing the thinnest, fig leaf covering of it, but being like, I'm actually just going to do it as it is. And it could be viewed as the most tragic and awful period in our history, or as the point where the sort of artifice of the political system that has led to the insurgency on both the left and the right, how that's navigated, who the hell knows? It could work out just fine, and we could be sitting back and saying, yeah, it was a bunch of people blowing steam on social media and a lot of punditocracy, and things went along, or it's the end of the American experiment. At this point, I have zero understanding of where that's going to go, and I don't feel like anyone does. And the biggest thing, and this is, I love the folks in this room, they're wonderful, patriotic Americans. The most inconvenient fact about the 2020 election on both sides of the aisle was the fact that Donald Trump improved not just the percentage, but his raw vote total in the city of Detroit. So all the folks on the left who said he was a racist and all this, I'm like, yeah, well, that racist is doing really well among, low propensity voters of color. And on the right, that wasn't where the election was stolen, because the election wasn't stolen. We still haven't rectified that. There are still folks in politics who think that my wonderful neighbors in an affluent, mostly white suburb, who voted for Romney in 2012 are going to come back into the tent with the right candidate. They're not. They're Democrats now. More power to them. Fine. They've chosen their side. Like, alignments are shifting. Alliances are shifting. Where this goes is going to be written. And paying attention to things in a moment where we cannot, I have no idea what I ate for breakfast today, and our attention spans or that of a goldfish. I don't know.
I had a breakfast burrito.
Was it good?
And I was at the Portico Hotel at the Canopy Hilton in downtown Grand Rapids. I had one complaint, and this is a major complaint, is that a lot of breakfast burritos have too many potatoes in them. I feel pretty passionately about that. And
do you want more egg is the question.
More egg, more protein. Yeah, more protein. And so for the second hour of this podcast, we're going to be talking about that. I'll put it this way. I did not realize that in the final few minutes of this podcast, things would get so dark. I feel like
why the hell did you invite me, Jonah? Come on.
I often expect it from getting like every now and then. Like the last time Kevin and I did one of these events, I had this riff about how this is still a great and decent country and they're full of good people and all this kind of stuff. And Kevin was like, so I'm used to Kevin being dark. And I feel like Peter needs some unfiltered cigarettes and a beret. And,
I no longer the Gauloise was never my style. I was a Reds man.
To see you just sitting in some cafe reading Sartre or something. So I'll just close by, and again, longtime listeners have heard me tell this story before, but like when Reagan was governor, he was at Berkeley or UCLA, one of those places, and there were student protesters all over the place, and let the record show they kind of looked like that. and they were screaming all sorts of things and yelling and all of that, and they chased Reagan to his car where his driver was waiting to get him out of there, and this dirty hippie has this sign, and he's screaming at Reagan in the back of his car saying, "We are the future. We are the future." And Reagan takes out a felt tip pen and a legal pad, and he writes something, and he makes his own sign, and he holds it up to the window, and it says, "Then I'm selling my bonds." And I'm sitting here right now thinking I got to call Dave Bonson and ask him about selling my bonds. So I'm going to respectfully reserve the right to dissent to all this. Fortunately, I have a very self-indulgent thing called the Remnant, which is the weekend solo podcast. So I'll have notes about all of this, but we do kind of have to wrap it up. And I want to say thank you really to all of you. It means an enormous amount. I cannot begin to tell you what it means, particularly to the younger staff at the Dispatch, to have. To know that there are people out there that appreciate what we're doing and why we're doing it, that they're not alone, and that they are, they've got real support out there from people who feel like they're making a meaningful contribution. It means a lot to us, and it means a lot to us that you guys are subscribers. It means a lot to us that you came out tonight. I know that these guys think the universe is this cold and different place and that we're all doomed, but it means a lot to me, and I'm grateful for it. And I have one request of you. Could we all, at the count of 3, just say, "No, you won't, this is a podcast"? So, 1, 2, 3.
No, you won't, this is a podcast.
Thank you all very much.
Ladies and gentlemen,
can I please have your attention?